Welcome to our session. We're ready to get started. Thanks very much for joining us. My name's Gillian Pillins, and I'm Research Director for CRF. Welcome to Stream 2. The topic is Designing Adaptable Organisations. And we have 3 speakers for you today, hopefully 3. We have 2 at the moment, and I'm just trying to sort out where our 3rd speaker is. So do bear with us. We're going to kick off with Amy Walters from Lane 4, who's going to be talking about the future of learning. Then we're going to hand over to Chris Ducker from orgvue to talk about data-driven organisational agility. And then we have Joachim from Oracle on realising organisational potential. So thanks to all of you. Each speaker will have 15 minutes. Followed by a Q&A at the end for about another 15 minutes. And so lots of opportunity to interact with our speakers. Please do use the right hand of your screen. You're already familiar with the chat, and it's great to see everyone taking part. Please use the chat to share any comments, questions. We will tackle them at the appropriate time in the discussions. And you can also, if you'd like to pose your question in person, we can also bring you onto the screen to do that live with your camera and audio on. If you'd like to do that, you can ask to share your audio and video if anyone's feeling brave today. We're all friends together, so no one's going to, it won't be an uncomfortable experience. But I can bring you on camera if you'd like to do that. So without further ado, let's get going, and we'll start with Amy. So thanks, Amy. Over to you.
Hi everyone. My name is Amy Walters, and I'm head of research at Lane 4. And it's a real pleasure to be here, throwing in some food for thought at this fantastic Thrive event. I think Michael's already got it off to a fantastic start. So hopefully this will spark some more ideas and great conversations. So like we said, we've got 15 minutes, so going to try and hit the ground running on how to future-proof your L&D strategy. Because of course, learning is a key part of your organization staying adaptable. My aim in this 15 minutes is to highlight some of the key trends that are happening in L&D and offer some evidence-based direction on where to be focusing your efforts, basically. My hunch is that this won't necessarily be a big shock or lots of news to you as L&D professionals and professionals in HR. It's more sort of reassurance that you're on the right path and maybe sparking some things that you hadn't considered. So yeah, I've got 50 minutes. I'll dive straight in, and do keep posting your questions, your chats, your opinions into the chat as we go through. We really want to stimulate that debate and discussion, so don't leave it just till the end. Getting cracking. This is the first slide. I apologize, there's a lot on here, but I wanted to give a bit of an indication about the past, present, and future of L&D, just to put things in context. So as we all know, traditionally L&D was very structured. Lots of face-to-face, actually digital only really used 20% of the time for L&D activity. Kind of a bit of sheep dipping, responding to evergreen business needs. Now we've moved beyond that and are in a more remote and diversified world, which is where we are currently. Things have become a lot more agile. And in the pandemic especially, L&D did a fantastic job of pulling everything online and responding to immediate business challenges. Also, sort of you see digital no longer being the poor relation of face-to-face. It's really in high demand from stakeholders and learners now. It's not necessarily that it's COVID changed the direction that L&D was going, but it definitely accelerated some of the changes that were already in the pipeline and removed some of the barriers to what L&D teams wanted to get done. Like switching half-day workshops to sort of smaller 2-hour bite-sized modules and those sorts of shifts. There's also a huge amount of interest at the moment bubbling around adaptive learning, personalized learning, how to integrate learning into the flow of work, all of that stuff. I think it's kind of like at this time in the remote and diversified world, it's almost like we opened the candy box on L&D and got excited about everything involved. And the future it then becomes a lot more focused again. So it's actually the key point about the future direction that L&D is going is that it involves data and AI, but it isn't about data and AI. So more than ever, as we look into the future, learning becomes increasingly about performance. You could almost call it a performance function rather than an L&D function. And it's all about helping people be the best in their role, adapt as that role changes, as it will inevitably do, and progress within their specific career. So you have this nice phrasing of the mass customization of L&D. We've also had a few people question from our clients around like, well, what's the space for face-to-face in the future? Are things just going to become more virtual and digital, and it saves a lot of money and a lot of time? But the evidence is overwhelming that you stay blended. Time and time again, research has shown that blended learning is the most effective at achieving outcomes. So our key message is to stick with blended. And also we're seeing a bit of a rise in social learning and the use of coaching, mentoring, subject matter experts to design content. So there's a few things in terms of the direction that L&D is going in. I've sort of mapped this out into a bit of a vision for where L&D is going. So you can see that you've got this idea of lean learning right at the heart. There's this strong focus on performance. It's all about people getting the right learning at the right time for the right reasons. And then around the outside of this wheel, you can see all the things that are going to enable that to happen. And I'll just do a quick whistle-stop tour of some of these. So on the top right, you've got proactive business partnering. And this is about L&D really continuing to step into that advisory space and being very proactive about how do people learn in reality, not in theory, and what is it that people need to learn to do their job well. And sort of listening to teams, listening to their needs, but also being more advisory in terms of looking at the wider strategy, looking at some of the challenges that teams are facing. And this sounds really obvious, but actually stats show that only 1 in 5 L&D teams are proactive in this business partnering space. So I think it's something that teams really need to hone their skills on and like elbow their way into conversations that matter so that they really have a voice and can add in their expertise and advisory sort of input. We've also got this real world application. So learning is going to become less and less sort of theoretical and abstract and more about real world situations, with learners asked to bring in projects that they're working on case studies, tackling everyday real challenges that they're facing. And I think the key point to flag here is that often we hear the phrase about learning in the flow of work, but work's also coming into the flow of learning. So those two things are really coming closer and closer together. So the quicker you can make that time between when someone's learning something and when they're applying it to their day-to-day job, the more future-proof your team's going to be. Got social learning, just a quick nod to that as well in the bottom right-hand corner. It's just this idea that ultimately the knowledge management function in a company and the L&D function are kind of merging here. So it's all about, does your company know what it knows? Like, are your people able to access the best quality content at the quickest time? Are they getting access to the people with the deep expertise in their specific role and field? Which you see, this is where you see things like coaching, mentoring, and the use of subject matter experts to design the content. So when people arrive somewhere or have access to a webinar or whatever, they feel that they're really spending time with those in the business who know the best stuff for what they need to do. It's very, very specific. Just building on that theme about specificity, it's all about things are becoming very scalable, but very, very bespoke. So essentially in the future, you have this combination of data being gathered on people around their performance needs, their past experience, their specific career ambitions, the competency frameworks of specific teams, and how people are performing in their role. And all of that will enable a very adaptive and personalized service for people that they can really access the learning that they need to do their role at the right time in the right way. The next one kind of links to digital transformation, which we've discussed a bit already with Michael in this event, was as organizations digitally transform, you'll see the data stream within a company become slicker. And there's a real opportunity for L&D to sort of harness this and get that link between what is the customer service that someone's offering, what's their performance like, and what learning are we providing them, and where's the links between that? Then you get into a very exciting space of being able to predict behavior, not only demonstrate L&D ROI, but also start to adjust with those algorithms. So like, okay, this is how the service someone's providing or how they're performing in their role. So these are the skills that they may be needing to develop or areas that we could fill. And finally, the other one's just a bit of a throw in as a promise, is the integrated learning platforms. It's a massive challenge for people at the moment, dealing with lots of different providers and platforms. And I don't think a challenge can exist that much in the market without people starting to integrate the offering so it becomes a lot slicker and more efficient to deal with. So you have all your providers and systems in one place for L&D. I think there are also two things that I'd like to challenge about the future of L&D. So the first is that there seems to be this common perception or misperception that as we move to mass customization, that L&D will somehow be expected to spoon feed learners just what they want. And it's all about what learners want and spoon feeding them. But the future of L&D isn't spoon feeding. It's saving time and removing barriers. So L&D's role is about ensuring everything in the environment is set up to help someone quickly and easily access the knowledge and learning they need to perform in their role and to progress in their role. So it's not about this kid on the left just spoon feeding them stuff. It's about this kid on the right, where you sort of put the chair in, you make sure the buffet is laid out for them. It's all about laying out the customized buffet and reading and removing the barriers and creating that culture of ownership. So that kid is still expected to pick up the strawberries and pick up the raspberries and do their own learning, really, and take ownership for that. And I think one of the best examples we've seen is like Kellogg's doing this really, really well. So Kellogg's moved from a one-size-fits-all approach to a one-size-fits-one approach. And they packaged it with a very clever marketing campaign around sort of hashtag I got this, which was a campaign all about inspiring employee ownership and control and power over your career and your performance. So it's very much L&D doing both of those things, providing an adaptive, personalized experience and inspiring a culture of ownership for your careers. The second thing I just want to dispel is that people, for some reason, there seems to be this perception that giving the learner what they want is a bad thing, and that somehow L&D organizations and the learners and managers are all on different pages with what they want. But as this statistic shows, everyone's on the same page. So 80% of people indicate that their strongest motivation to learn at work is in order to do their jobs better and faster. So it just shows that everyone kind of wants the same thing here. Everyone's just trying to do their job better and progress and enhance performance. The most common barrier for people is just time. And time is a question of what you prioritize and what you value. So then it comes back that the key thing L&D needs to do is to build trust. Because when people feel that it's time well spent and they're getting, whenever they invest in their time in their learning, they're getting what's relevant to them, the sort of access to the best people in their organization to help them do their job and sort of learn and progress in their work, then the time barrier becomes less of a challenge because people are seeing the value, the performance value in what they're getting from investing that time in learning. So I've got 5 tips. I'm just checking my time. I think I'm okay. There's lots of different tips we could give in terms of the trends and where to take your L&D, but we tried to pick out sort of 5 key ones. The first one is just to stay blended in your offering, but there's a bit of a knack to this. So I think what we're noticing is that you definitely still want to have face-to-face within your L&D offering, but you really need to be careful about what method you're using to deliver what training. So if someone's coming to a face-to-face course, you don't want them arriving and experiencing the time and then thinking, oh, this could have been done online. You want them to have the complex, the difficult discussions, the difficult topics that are some less easy to grapple with and get your head around, that really benefit from having people in the room. Secondly, focus on data, not the shiny adaptive technology. So this is another thing we've noticed as we sort of move into this world of digital transformation, is that there's a tendency to focus on what's cool and people looking for the adaptive technology that will help give them a Netflix-style platform and all those algorithms and stuff. And you can basically forget that if you don't have your data house in order and you don't have really good data systems and data hygiene almost. So at this stage, we'd definitely be recommending Andy focus on getting your data house in order so that when the adaptive learning systems come along and you get sort of the algorithms and all that technology, you're ready to harness it. Because you can have the best systems in the world, but if your data is not good, it won't be able to do anything. Thirdly is this proactive business partnering, which again is really, really key. And we're seeing that there's a slight gap in, we know this is important. We know that L&D teams have been doing it for a while, but it's important to ramp it up now and really step into that advisory role. Unlock the expertise already in the system. This is, again, harnessing, coaching, mentoring, use of subject matter experts to co-create content, but so much knowledge, tacit knowledge already in your company. And L&D really need to start activating that and drawing in that knowledge management role to unlock what's already known. And finally, demonstrate these links between performance and the learning provided. Again, this just has massive benefits for proving the ROI value of L&D, and also making the system smarter in terms of, okay, we can spot or predict what someone's performance is going to like and what their service is like, so what skills that they need. And it's really about optimizing all this change that's coming in with digital transformation and data being really streamlined across an organization. There's again massive opportunities, and L&D just need to jump in and get involved and make sure what they need is being taken into account and looked after in terms of data and what they've got back from the company. So I think I'm just checking my time, 14 minutes. I'm quite proud of that. I hope that's useful. And I can't see the chat, but I hope people have been posting and do just get involved with any questions in the Q&A. It's a bit of a whistle-stop tour, but hopefully it's given a little shine of where L&D is going.
Thanks, Amy. Brilliantly managed, bang on time. So congratulations. Thank you for that. We'll be dealing with questions at the end. So there's an opportunity for everyone to reflect on what they might want to ask. And we'll come back to you later on in the session. I'm going to hand over to Chris now. So Chris is going to be telling us a bit more about data-driven organisational agility and how we achieve that. So we're really building on what Amy's been saying about data. Over to you, Chris.
Great, thanks very much, Gillian. I'll just get this presentation up and then we can start going. And Amy, loved the image there of the spoon feeding the baby. I think that's a great image and a great message on there. A couple of other things that you said as well. So today I'm going to be focusing on organisational agility, particularly in the face of disruption, and a couple of areas I'm going to drill into how workforce decision making has changed over the last 18 months through that upheaval that we've had, and how time to decision making has become important in that process. And then finally, I'll look at how do you leverage data with confidence so that you can engage executives and drive change through your organization. First, just for those who have not come across orgvue before, just to let you know that we're a design and planning platform that helps you to see what is going on in your organization today, model for the future, and then plan and track progress in getting the right resources, doing the right work to achieve those goals. So hopefully that sets a little bit of context for the rest of the slides that I'll be sharing with you today. So clearly this year has been, the last 18 months has been a tumultuous period, and what is clear is that during that period, the need for HR to support the business has grown quite significantly in importance. It's not just about HR managing the employee life cycle, but also about how we help in the decision making and aligning our resources to business direction. In fact, I was listening to a webinar recently where the CHRO at Google Cloud was talking about how we've got to really own strategy from the human resources perspective, and operating within the business by showing information, understanding the strategy and linking it and helping leaders transform those more strategic areas. And I think that's quite a key point in the area in terms of where the relevance for HR is. So although the remit hasn't changed, I think there are a number of other really disruptive factors that people have had to face in the last year or so. And I'll just touch on a couple of these and these external drivers that we're facing, and see how some resilient businesses are actually reacting by preparing their businesses for this era of constant change. I think one of the key areas is around talent and skills. And actually what's quite interesting now is how 35% of companies actually are operating as a network of teams. So that means that they're sharing talent, sharing the skills and the goals across the company. And what's quite interesting is that particularly during the period where people were furloughed, 40%, according to Gartner, of employees are frequently completing tasks that are outside of their job description. And that's basically proving that roles are no longer designed to capture the skills for today's workflows, but also that when you're designing who's going to be doing the work within your organization, you don't need to focus just on the roles that people have and move things around in an org chart, but look at the skills, the competencies, and the actual work that's being done as well. So, it's a focus more on what people can do, not just the job title that becomes part of the decision-making process when you're trying to achieve those goals. There's quite a lot on this slide, so I'm only going to pick a couple of other areas, but one for me is around the whole hybrid working subject. This is very much front of mind at the moment as people are beginning to return to work and trying to understand whether they want to work at home or not. So it's quite interesting that 87% of leaders here are cited as allowing more flexibility, which when you go back to April of last year was around 35% number. But at the same time, half employees actually expect to work from home for less than 2 days a week. So the demands of the individual and the demands of the business need to modify to take all of this into consideration. And in fact, 72% of organizations are adopting a hybrid approach. But then, again, this comes down to an analysis of the data and looking at what work can be done remotely and what work has to be done from premise. And actually looking at some of the opportunities that this might open up for you as an organization, where in fact you can expand your talent pool when you start to take geographic assumptions away from the planning. So when you're doing your workforce plan, you might find that actually hybrid working opens up more opportunities than it closes. I think the key thing though is that get it right and you can make changes in the market. And in fact, if we look at people like Airbnb, in the middle of the pandemic in December of last year, they went public with a valuation of 90 billion. And that is more than twice the valuation of Marriott and 3 times that of Hilton. So in the hotel trade, if you like to call Airbnb in that, which faced huge disruption as a result of people not being able to travel, they were still able to pull off a massive launch like that based on the platform that they've got and continuing to do business. But there are other examples. If you look in the UK, for example, with ASOS buying Topshop or Boohoo buying Debenhams, the online providers seem to be taking a strong advance within the retail trade. But then counter that, you look at people like Tesco's, who have shifted a massive amount of resources to online and fulfillment through, through warehousing, through online ordering, but then had to shift back and shift again as lockdowns ended and restarted. I think the point here is that there are workforce planning assumptions that and changes that need to be made very, very quickly as external factors start to interact. And it's not all around pandemic. It's just that that's been one of the most important economic disruptors that we've seen recently. What's clear though is that organizations need to be agile and in the process balance the needs of the employee experience with those of the business. So we've done a fair amount of research ourselves in this, and this is looking at some of the decisions that we're seeing that people have had to make. And if you look at this from this workforce planning perspective, we've noticed that workforce decisions have almost doubled over the last year, whether that's responding to customer needs, redeploying resources, or even managing costs in this changing landscape. And to do this, it's important to get the right information together and help drive those business decisions as a human resources leader within that space. To do that, you sort of need the data to do the planning. So you need to understand the skills that people have to plan for flexible workforce, or the activity data to understand the cost or whether work is being fragmented and done by small amounts of work being done by too many people. And then you need the tools that help you to identify where the gaps are, quickly map the right resources and show availability, who's allocated, the costs, etc. Particularly when you're looking at things like agile teams, where you might have people allocated to multiple different tribes or groups, and therefore you need to be able to see who is available and who isn't, and whether you've got the right people at the right levels doing the right work. So to do this, you're going to need to take data from multiple sources, and that's one of the challenges. As we'll see in a moment, all of the different data sources, the different types of data that you might be taking. It's traditionally very difficult then to manage that if you're doing it in Excel, which is the way that people have done it historically. But very often when they're doing that, they sort of hand it over to multiple spreadsheets to data analysts who go into a darkened room and analyze it and then come back with the answers. The downside of that is that when people are not involved in the decision making or can't see how that decision making is being done, you very often lose confidence in the data and engagement in progressing any changes or plans that you're having. So it's quite important really to use the tools, if you can, that make that data more visual and easier to understand, so that people can make decisions and involve and engage in that process, and therefore buy into anything that comes out of it in terms of any changes you want to make in your organization. The second point around this area actually is around workforce planning. Just by shifting people in an org chart is too limited, and it fails to take into account the interrelation between the various different aspects of the work that's going on, the activity that people are doing, the skills, the gaps, etc., etc. So just moving people from based on their job role or title from one place to another might give you an indication of where you might be saving money or optimizing costs or things like that, but it won't really tell you whether the work is going to be done, or whether by making those moves you've got implications in terms of the skills that you're losing or things like that. So you need this broader reach of data to confidently lead business decisions from the human resources perspective. And then you need an ability to tell stories with that data, which is where visualizations come into the process. And it's tough making the right decisions on the future of the organization, because there's sort of uniform agreement that workforce decisions are more important. They last far longer and require much more analysis than ever before. But what's also quite interesting, and again, this is from our own research that we did at the back end of last year, that 92% of organizations are telling us that the time to make a decision actually is a key success metric. And in fact, if you look at that, what we've seen is that organizations that make decisions quicker actually see 16% more annual profit than those that don't. So the rewards are high for the organizations that get it right and have the right information. But when you look at it, actually the amount of information that you're processing, and I'm not expecting people to be able to read this slide, but what we've put on here is just a whole list of things that people consider or need to consider when they're making some workforce decisions. So clearly it's exhaustive. And in fact, there's a nice quote from Colin Powell, who talks about acting with less than 40% of the data needed is actually reckless, but waiting for more than 70% of the data might be fatal. And the key really is around balancing the time and certainty between those two numbers. And that's where the challenge lies for all organizations. So from this really is a question that I would ask, or a couple of questions is, where do you see yourselves against these things? Do you have enough data so that you're not in that 40%? Have you got the right data, but you can't actually see what it's telling you? In which case, maybe it's a focus on getting the tools that can give you visual impact and see what's actually going in the organization. Or are you actually in the C category here, where you've got the right data and the right insights to guide you forwards? Of course, these are questions that everyone needs to answer for themselves, but it'd be interesting to see. And if you've got any comments you want to put in the chat around this area, it'd be interesting to see, what your thoughts are around that. So sort of presenting all of that information, I guess my top tips fall into this category. The first thing is ditch those spreadsheets, because they don't really give you an ability to be agile, see what's going on properly and make proper decisions quickly. You need experts doing that, and actually there are other tools that bring this into the range of people within the HR team or within the business. One of the fundamental pieces, though, is set your data foundation. So, source your data from multiple systems, try and bring it into a single system if you can, and clean it, align it into one place so you set that baseline, and then use that information to analyze and see what's happening. And from our perspective, we're very keen to promote the use of visualizations, because I think you can only get those at our moment when you put that data into charts and diagrams that tell you more than you would see from a list of lines on a spreadsheet. The third thing there is sort of go beyond shifting people in an org chart, and use tools to make the analysis much richer. So this is where you start to ask some of those what if questions to model for the future. How will that improve cost? What skills will I lose during a transition? What happens to my available talent pool if I take geography out of the equation, as I was saying earlier? What work can be performed remotely and in person and on site? And those questions will help you to adapt to bringing your planning in line with the business drivers that you've got. And then when you've done that, you can then drive the team with visual storytelling. So use charts, show implications, and align with those business drivers. And with that, you'll improve the engagement and understanding of the people that you're influencing, and therefore be able to lead with confidence and become that trusted advisor to the C-suite. If there's any questions, please pop them in the thing. We're going to have the Q&A in a moment, but there is additional reading if you wanted it from us at orgvue. And if you want to contact me separately via LinkedIn, then I'll happily answer any questions. But from my perspective, that's the presentation. I hope I've managed to keep to time there, Gillian, and back over to you.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Lovely job. We're running nicely on time, so let's keep going for our final push. Joachim Skura from Oracle, thanks very much for joining us. I'm sorry we had a couple of technical wrinkles earlier on, but delighted to have you with us now. And I'll hand over to you to tell us a bit more about, for 15 minutes maximum, talking to us a little bit about realising organisational potential. So welcome, Joachim.
Fantastic. Thanks for having me. My name is Joachim Skura, and I'm the business director for business strategy and sales development for the HCM applications part of Oracle. And this is quite 15 minutes is always a little bit challenging. And does it work with the slides, Gillian, by the way?
Okay.
Does it work? Yeah?
Yes, we can see your slides.
Fantastic. Great. And but the challenge of this 15 minutes is not just to do 15 minutes. It's about that I will share a project with you, a study which we ran for 2 years, and now need to squeeze it in within these limited time frame. So no time to waste. Let's directly jump into it. Everything which was said, I do perfectly agree. And I might be able to add a model now, which kind of proves the one or other aspects, or at least gives some data behind on another point of view. But let me take you one step away from HR or HR-specific processes. And we've been asking ourselves the question, if we do not know really what the decision-making criteria are for HR projects, we definitely can get an assumption or can create an assumption what it is all about from an organization point of view, and to stay ahead in this head-to-head race. And I think this is a picture which is closer to reality than the view that we're having a certain very unique USP. It is a little bit the necessity of organizations to create something and adapt to the changes out there in a way to create something or a product or a service which makes them to a certain point unique. Thus, we kind of related with a study which we did together with the well-regarded WHU, Otto Beisheim School of Management, for a time frame of 2 years. We related to this concept of dynamic capabilities, which is the ability of an organization to create and shape something which is not that easy to be duplicated in terms of assets, intellectual properties, and the like, to create exactly such a service. But what we do see in reality is something interesting when we do speak about technology. And this is like perfectly, it's a super easy chart, but it really very well reflects my perception of business reality when we do speak with customers. On the one hand, we have this huge technological progression, and on the other hand, we do not see that being reflected in daily productivity. And let me dive a little bit deeper into that, because I think when we're speaking about technologies, and we've been hearing a lot about data or digital, I think we mingle a lot of different technologies all together. And this is worth a closer look. So this is a study from McKinsey, just highlighting the top technologies which will really, on the long term, entirely change our lives. And we speak about mobile computing, automation of knowledge work, for sure, cloud technology. And this is typically the area where an organization like Oracle will operate in, but also in IoT, robotics, genomics, energy storage, 3D printing, advanced materials, and this entire topic of e-mobility. This is all technology which will affect the way we do work, and we will need to act as an organization. Maybe, as I said, the top 3 points from our perspective, what are the areas where we do think organizations should invest in or should be good in terms of technology also enabling the HR processes. And these are mainly 5 key aspects from our perspective. This is this entire topic of evidence-based HR. This is everything in terms of analytics and so on. Then innovation technology, meaning integration of bots, artificial intelligence, and all aspects of a better user experience, or even a human experience, as we would say these days. Everything in this corner of dynamic operating model, not only thinking about the tree architecture, tree org chart, but we're speaking of matrix organizations or even temporary matrix organizations, big investments and divestments, and all these needs to be reflected. This entire functional role models need to be reflected in the system as a core. And on the other hand, what we call employee proposition. How are you able to make a career within these fluid organizations? And all of that, and this is point 5, under the backbone of regulation, compliance, and security. If you have that in place, then you are able to make the best out of something what we call integrated data, to be adaptable and create experiences for the employee as well as for the managers, rather than just thinking processes. So having said so, we wanted to, together with WHU, take a little closer look and really understand and not just make educated guessing, because typically what I do here when I'm on conferences or listening to people on speeches is that they come up with oftentimes some intelligent thoughts how things are interconnected within an organization, but hardly or nobody can really put some numbers behind, wow, this really the one, if you twist one component, how this affects your organization. And I think there's one aspect which we all do encounter typically in organizations, and to the good and to the bad. Year over year, we're kind of doing the same good and the same bad. And it's pretty hard for organizations to really do something different and really set up projects or organizational forms with good intent and saying like, hey, we want to step out of the routine. And I think one of the key components which enables organizations to do so, and that's why we went on this journey to create this model, is evidence. So just for the sake of documentation, this is the study and how it looks like. It's called the Adaptable Business for good reason. It's not called the Agile Business. It's called Adaptable because I think this reflects reality more. And we struggled within the project team quite some time on that term. Because it's a permanent process and a permanent journey we are all in. Just 2 QR codes for everybody to look it up, because we will not be able to run through the entire study. I just can animate you and give you a little glimpse on what it's all about. So this is one of the biggest researches which have been undertaken in the last couple of years, as far as I do know. We've been having a vast catalog of questions, 377 to be precise. And we shared it first with continental Europe, and then suddenly when we had a huge success in terms of people really answering this tremendous amount of this big catalog, which we didn't expect. In the second iteration, Asia jumped on that train and they wanted to be part of that survey as well. And then we included also North America, and we ended up in total we had like 6,450 professionals which we interviewed, and a subset even of 850 professionals in HR. And we then step by step with the results, which have been 2.5 million data points, we shaped a model which can be summarized like that. So as I said, if you want to win that hat, or if you win that hat-to-hat race, you're having a positive organizational performance. So this was our, let's say, more or less starting point to start from the reverse. So we are now having the data that business efficiency, or you can also say productivity, affects organizational performance to a 42% degree. Also, other big effects could be, and please be aware of that, could be major investments or major divestments, or monopolistic market setups, which could definitely influence the organizational performance. But what we are, as managers, are able to influence is the productivity side of things. And productivity is massively interconnected with something and 64% is really massive correlation, and this something is 7. We've been able to isolate 7 levers, so to say, which technology make an impactful vehicle. But please have in mind that this is a summary. This is not only about communication and collaboration software or business software. This is reflecting more on what I said to all aspects of technology. But the interesting finding of that is, and these are proven figures, that technology itself will not do the job. But without technology, you don't have a chance to succeed either, because these 7 levers, for example, data-driven decision-making or flexibility and embracing change, something which we just heard of, shared digital vision, or even critical thinking, open questioning, these are all massively, or learning and development, or learning culture, as we called it, massively influenced by modern technology. And you can see that the effect which this jointly has on productivity is a big one. Let me take you a little bit into some examples. What does that concretely mean? And for example, as I said, data-driven decision-making is the highest ranked factor in the study. But we've been surprised, for example, and we've been asking, would organizations be okay-ish in kind of reflecting or reassessing the decisions they did with data? And interesting enough, 66, 2/3 said that they rather better not do that. And this kind of really surprised at that. And we've been asked, and for sure, it was clear that that only a third said like evidence and analytics is part of the decision-making process. It was interesting to see, for sure. We asked, how do you come to decisions then? And many organizations told us it's a HIPPO decision, the highest incomes person, personal opinion decision. In other words, hierarchy more than analytics. So for sure, big room for improvement. Another point which we found out and which was already addressed as well, we thought that when we reflect upon flexibility and embracing change, that the easiest way to reflect flexibility is remote working. So we found out that 50% of the organizations are willing and really are already experimenting around with fluid components. But on the other hand, only a good third said that they're really planning to have remote working within the next 3 years, which is an interesting finding, especially this is a pre-COVID finding, I need to say, but numbers, we think that numbers increased massively. They did increase a little, but with everything which is more which is more blue collar oriented, it definitely did not. Another interesting finding was also where we've been asking, how are you? What are the important skills which we do need for technological world? And interesting enough, I thought at the beginning as a thesis that will be definitely technical skills. But the reality was differently. We've been seeing that leadership, communication, collaboration, analytical thinking skills have been more of importance than sheer technical skills. So it's more about hiring a certain attitude over a certain skill set, which will lead to a reasonable future. Let me jump forward in terms of time because I want to share a little bit more, lay out to you what you will find in the study if you're interested to read it. For example, I took out 2 factors which kind of have some surprising effects because we already addressed data-driven decision making. You see that, for example, flexibility and embracing change is an interesting one. What you will find in the study is proven facts, how we come to that conclusion. So I already shared that the awareness of new forms of work is definitely there. 53% various organizations are planning to have remote working, but then we are taking it deeper in the survey or in the results of the study that the speed of change is much overrated, but the sustainability of the change is so much underrated. You can sum it all up that this entire digitalization, adaptability or need for adaptation will definitely not be something which you can just watch pass by. It will be a continuous marathon, not a sprint adaptation to new reality. And this is typically something how we lay out the factors within the study and really prove to everybody the effects on productivity. I brought another example, but for the sake of time, let's skip it. Just some credits to the team who've been with me on a 2-year journey. As a picture which we did in our London office. I think it's worth giving it a read, the model, for 2 purposes. One is you can consider, definitely you'd all have certain points of view where you think like, hey, the one affects the other, and now you can really prove it with a scientifically proven number-proven model. And secondly, you can, if you have a certain project, you can even justify this project adding or asking yourself the question, okay, to which of the factor does this project contributes to? Because then you have a good justification internally to say like, okay, we will have a positive impact on productivity. So having said so, this is the model, and thank you very much. It's not only technology, it's what you do with that technology, and that is what we're our key finding.
Okay, Joachim, thank you very much, and thanks to all our speakers. So we're now going to go into a Q&A session. I'd encourage everyone who's on the call to share any questions in the chat. I'm going to kick off with one, and I'd like to go back to the theme of this session, which is designing adaptable organisations. And we've heard about We've heard about learning, we've heard about technology, we've heard about data, we've heard about various other things as well. I'd like to just ask each of the panelists, thinking about designing adaptable organisations, what would be your priority or your sort of key recommendation around that? I mean, obviously it's a vast topic, but if you can just maybe reflect on where would you start, if we're talking about designing adaptable organisations. So do we have a brave volunteer to go first, or should we go in order?
We can either do ladies first or I go first. You can choose, Amy.
I don't mind. I can throw in, I have initial reaction to that, I guess, or a thought of where my head goes. And a lot of it is just, I think to be adaptable, you need to be very good at doing change. And for various reasons, a lot of us have certain immunities to change, and it's just inbuilt in us that we don't like to do it too much or too often. And I think that's just going to have to change in companies, and people are going to have to get very good at letting go of skills and embracing new ones, and letting go of processes or things that they've valued doing for a long time and embracing new things. So I think there's a massive space for that sort of mentoring and coaching within companies to really get people skilled at adapting and embracing new differences, both within their specific role and within the company. That's where my head goes.
Mm-hmm. So really building capability around change, in essence. Yeah. Thanks, Amy. How about you, Chris?
Well, actually, I'd echo that point. I think it's, change is effectively what it's about. So if you want to adapt, you need to change, and people are having to do that increasingly quickly. So when you're doing that, I think a key thing about change is about engagement. So you need to bring on board people around the business, whether that's the executives and your sponsors, to make sure that they get behind whatever transformation or whatever activity it is that you're trying to drive. But equally, it's about engaging the people that actually have to affect the change. So the line of business managers and the others. And to do that, I think, going back to this theme of data, and I think Joachim had a great point there around data, is actually, if you can engage people by showing them the data and actually showing what that data means to them in their lives and how they fit into the bigger picture, it's much easier to then articulate the vision and the direction that you're wanting to go in through this change thing, and therefore you get the engagement, and therefore you get a successful transformation. So it's a combination of all of those aspects.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks, Chris. And Joachim, what about you? Do you have perhaps a different perspective on this question?
No, maybe only to add. I think it's so easy to be misled in terms of your assumptions, what really will have an effect. And I think what we do encounter is a big willingness definitely out there in terms of adapting the organization or changing something or using technology. But from huge corporations to medium-sized businesses, hardly anybody really has, can I say, a clue, and forgive me if I'm using weird formulations sometimes and not native speaker. Organizations do not really have an orientation, what to do first, second, third, and what to prioritize. What we, for example, did with the model, and that's why we really went on this quantitative journey, because we really wanted to assess the effects. And I can sum it up, for example, and I'm a strong believer that collaboration and communication is very beneficial for an organization. We all agree on that. But all of us, I mean, we can ask ourselves, would we have thought that this has a 5 times less impact than, for example, data-driven decision-making? I find that interesting, and I do not want to say that the one is wrong and the other one is right. It is about having this holistic view and really taking into account different angles. It's a little bit like that, what was it called, like Dead Poets Society. You take on different angles and see, like, okay, what could be a reasonable route for us, but fact-proof and not just guessing. I think if organizations would follow that advice, I think they would do better. Yeah. Or that would be beneficial.
Okay, great. Thanks for that. I was really struck by something you said, Joachim. You talked about hippos. And bias, who makes a decision and on what basis do they make a decision? And it's based on the person who's most senior in the room, and perhaps what their gut feel says, not necessarily rooted in data. But at the same time, we've just released a CRF paper looking at some of the latest thinking around hybrid working. And one of the insights that I thought was really interesting was there are lots of examples of companies using crowdsourcing to work out their strategy for hybrid working. And when you were talking about data, one of the things that was going through my head was, well, what do we actually mean by data? What data are we talking about? And sometimes data, that sort of crowdsourced data, can actually be incredibly helpful and valid. It's not your sort of spreadsheet type data or data out of an HCM system. But I just wondered, sort of your perspective around when we're talking about data to support organization design. What are the right sources of data that we should be looking at, and not necessarily just what's coming out of our HCM system.
Absolutely.
It's a pretty rambling thought, but I'd be interested to hear your perspective on that.
I think once you even start to ask the tiniest little question, you directly step out of the HR data pool, because you want to we do think in more complex questions. Hey, we want to enter a certain market. So then you need to have product, financial, market data in combination with the people data. It's more about all the scenario building. And I think this is something organizations, if I compare the world today with the world like 5 years ago, I think there's much broader understanding that people, even in the HR space, people do understand that they have different data pools within the organization. There's this finance area, and then you have the market data related, product related data, and the people related data. But all of these, but an organization, a service, a dynamic capability, if I can come back to this term of the study, is built out of all the corners. It's not just the people in this tiny little HR space. It is people being productive in an organization. And so I think this changed. But maybe one aspect and a question which comes to my mind, I thought you would go in a different corner, which I find very interesting. What happens if all the data, which is then kind of analyzed and kind of resulting in some kind of insight, does not bring up the expected results, or is kind of not aligned with how we are managing the organization? To which degree is an organization really open to take in, let's say, a critical assessment of the current situation and kind of absorb it and do something out of that? I found that a very interesting question, because in reality, coming back to the HIPPO decision, as you would say, the hierarchical decision, it's at least definitely creating some kind of clash within organizations.
Yeah, that's a fascinating question. It really comes to the core of, how do we make decisions, and if something really challenges to our existential core as an organization, what do we do with that? Chris, I wanted just to that point, is that something that you've seen in practice, where when people start using the sort of tools that you provide and see quite a different sort of data-driven perspective on the organization design? Does that, have you seen instances where this sort of fundamental questioning has happened, and then how have organizations looked to resolve that?
Well, absolutely. And in fact, I mean, you do need to get a range of sources of data, but I think one of the key things is how do you use that, and how do you manipulate it, and how do you do the analysis? And this is where people have had a lot of difficulty in the past, and this is where tools start to help. So for example, our tool will take data in from various HR information systems. It'll take it in from financial planning systems, and some analysis from some of the external factors. But then we sort of augment that data with surveys or crowdsource information around things like skills or activities or competencies. And we have a list of things where people can rank themselves or rank people within their team against these various different things, so that then helps you to make decisions around where there are gaps, where, for example, in Amy's space, you might want to build a training plan for individuals. You look at the competencies that they've got versus the competencies that you'd expect for their job role or their responsibilities, and you can start looking at where those gaps are. And similarly, when you're thinking about the hippo, it's how do you bring all of that data together and then present it in a way that you can actually influence the decision making. Because if you're presenting, some numbers that have come out of a load of spreadsheets in sort of a really slow to generate process, you need to present that information in a way that these highly paid executives can actually engage with it, understand the story, what the data is telling you, and then from that make the decisions or agree or disagree with the recommendations that you make on the back of that data. So I think format is quite an important part in that. So you bring your data in, you cross-reference all of those pieces, you bring it down to that baseline from which you do your analysis and your scenario modeling. And then you present that in a visual format that aligns with the way in which executive people do think and make decisions. So and they're very much visual thinkers. So this is where tools and like orgvue, for example, can help you with that, because it takes away the heavy lifting.
Yeah,
you're not spending a long time doing all of that stuff, and you start to present that information.
Absolutely, and I think that's certainly what we continuously find is that skill for HR around engaging in analytics, storytelling, visualization, being able to create a compelling story around that is a real area of development for the HR function. Just like to as we close off, to tap into Laura's question about, we're now coming very contemporary, we're coming back into the office, and it's affected, working from home has affected people's soft skills and ability to collaborate. So just a question, how should we address this as we come back into the office? Just very quickly, and Amy, I'll start with you. If you want to share a quick thought on that. And
I think it's a really interesting question. I think we'll have to learn to get good at networking and collaborating in this more hybrid format. I don't think we can just assume, it's just going to be like it was. I think my biggest reflection as we sort of do return back to the office is just how people frame up work. So I, for one, went back for the first time yesterday. And I think we've got used to being intensely productive and everything, nothing's informal almost in this virtual space. So when you go back into the office, it's almost shocking how much the informal time takes away from your daily amount of ability to get stuff done. And it can generate quite a lot of stress. So I think people have got to shift and to mentally allow time for that collaboration and informal networking, and don't think, oh my gosh, I'm not getting my work done. It's that is part of work. And I think it's a slight mindset shift that people will need to get used to again, and appreciating and valuing that sort of spontaneous nature of the office. I think it will be a massive shift for people to get used to.